Good morning. At this point in our service, we would usually do what we call a time for all ages, and I would invite the children to come forward and I tell them a story. This morning I wanted to tell everybody the same story at the same time. And you might have noticed all these little boxes on the table here in front. Some of you know what they're for. Today we begin our annual participation in the Guest at Your Table program. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the program, let me explain. Guest at Your Table is a program from the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee to raise support for and awareness of key human rights issues. The UUFC works in more than 20 countries with more than 60 grassroots partners. Each year, they highlight a specific human rights issue or challenge. Now, some of you may recall that last year it was the migrant and refugee crisis. For 2019 and 2020, the committee has chosen to focus on women leaders who are working to increase representation for women and to improve access for justice to all in their respective countries. The 4 women highlighted this year are working to combat the effects of climate change in the South Pacific, fighting for the human rights of ethnic minorities such as the Rohingya in Burma, and confronting gender-based violence in Honduras. You can find their stories on the UUFC website, and I encourage you to go and take a look at it and read them. Some of them are kind of dark stories, though. So, what I wanted to share with you this morning is the story of one of those women, Monica Cursa. Monica was 5 years old when her family fled communist persecution in Romania. As refugees, Monica says she and her family, quote, lost a lot of ourselves in the process. As an adult, Monica wanted to reach out and help other refugees and other migrants. But she found that many of the organizations who were active on behalf of these people were focused on things like policy change, which, although important, it seemed to Monica that there was something missing in how these communities were being served. She knew from her own experience how traumatic being a refugee could be, especially for a child. And she also knew how much we need things like joy and creativity and self-expression to help us heal from trauma. But many of the activists that Monica worked with saw that as the silly stuff. So she founded her own organization, Activate Labs, which is a DC-based group that brings art, music, and storytelling into spaces migrants pass through on their route from Central America. This is places like food kitchens, shelters, transit points, and border walls. She shows up, art supplies and boombox in hand, what she calls her ingredients for joy, and she and her team give people a chance to tell their story, whether it be through art, or dance, or making a video with other migrants. And they are helping to meet a universal human need. So when you take your box or your envelope, if you would prefer, home with you at the end of the service today, I'd like you to think of Monica and her paintbrushes and her boombox, and help her spread a little joy and creativity in the world by giving to the UUFC. So the focus of my subject this morning is the 1912 strike in the textile mills in Lawrence, Massachusetts. It's not something that I think many of us in 2020 have ever really heard about or thought much about. But it came to my attention as, believe it or not, part of the Guest at Your Table materials. And it has to do with that creativity and that joy that we were talking about. Although, in 1912, it wouldn't have seemed like there was a lot of creativity and joy in Lawrence, Massachusetts. It was the quintessential mill town. Each year, those mills turned out mile upon mile upon mile of wooden cloth. By the turn of the 20th century, mechanization had enabled factory owners to eliminate much of their skilled labor and instead hire unskilled immigrant labor from more than 30 different countries that were all living together in Lawrence. The American Woolen Company, the leading employer in the town, recruited workers in Italy, for example, with colorful posters depicting beaming workers leaving the mills with bags of gold in hand. This is what we would today call false advertising. Work in the mills was dangerous and repetitive. Fabric particles filled the air, causing respiratory disease, and the constant noise from the machines damaged workers' hearing. It was commonplace for workers to be suffering from chronic coughs and be almost deaf after a few years in the mills. Women and children made up the majority of the workforce. In 1912, half of the workers at the 4 mills owned by the American Woolen Company were young girls between the ages of 14 and 18. Or at least, that's what it said on the official records. By law, no one in the progressive state of Massachusetts could work in the mills under the age of 14. But there was a thriving trade in fake papers, so that children as young as 12, sometimes 10, or even 9 could go to work in the mills. Many of those families needed every single penny those children could earn. On average, a mill worker earned $8.76 for 46 hours of work a week. Some barely earned $6 a week. Most of that money went to pay the rent. And guess who owned the apartment buildings? The mill workers. And to put meager meals on the table for their families. They lived in crowdy, dingy tenement apartments, often with more than one family. 10, 12, 14 people squeezed together in a few rooms with a communal bathroom at the end of the hall. In 1912, 86,000 people were crammed into 7 square miles in the tenements. Many families survived on bread, molasses, and occasionally beans. As one worker testified before the March 1912 congressional investigation of the strike, "When we eat meat, it seems like a holiday, especially for the children." Half of those children died before they were 6 years old. And 36% of the adults who worked in the mill died before they were 25. The average life expectancy was 39 years old. But such conditions were a far cry from the situations enjoyed by the mill owners and their families, who had long since removed themselves to mansions in Andover or Boston's Back Bay. In 1912, not a single mill owner or textile stock owner lived in Lawrence. William Wood, the owner of the largest of the mills in town, had 5 homes and was rumored to have boasted that he had more cars than he could count. This vast income inequality in the Gilded Age sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? You would think, with so many people jammed together in terrible housing with barely enough money to put food on the table, that Lawrence would be a hotbed of union activity. But it wasn't. Nor did anyone expect that it ever really would be. As bad as we might think these things were from our 21st century perspective, in 1912, Lawrence was considered to be the best of the mill towns. Believe it or not, wages were higher there than they were in Holyoke or North Adams. Job conditions were better than they were in Fall River. Beyond that, the mill owners used the very ethnic diversity of their workers as a wedge. If, for example, German workers began to talk of unionizing, they were quickly reminded by their bosses and the mill owners that there were plenty of Italians, or Syrians, or Lithuanians, etc., who would be happy to take their jobs for them. So, when the Massachusetts legislature passed a law reducing the maximum work week in the mills from 56 hours to 54 hours, mill owners made plans to do as they had in the past. Just cut the workers' wages. In this case, by about 32 cents per worker. And they expected that those workers would accept it. They also expected that the workers would do another thing that they'd always done when there was a decrease in hours. Running the mills in what they called speed-ups, in which the machinery ran faster and more cloth was produced per hour, so that the daily quotas remained the same. This made the work even more dangerous than it usually was. And basically, those men, women, and children would be expected to continue doing the same work for less pay. But in January 1912, something turned out to be a little bit different than expected. When that first payday came, and workers opened their envelopes to find their checks shorted by that 32 cents, many of them had had enough. 32 cents in those days would have bought about 3 loaves of bread. For many of those families, bread was all they had. They ate a plain slice of bread for breakfast each morning. If you were lucky, and it was a particularly extravagant morning, you might get a smear of molasses on your bread. But that was it. Bread again for lunch, and perhaps dinner as well, if you got 3 meals that day. So the workers in Lawrence went on strike. By the thousands. All of them together. What the mill owners and the union activists had said was the impossible. Men, women, children, Italian, German, Lithuanian, Polish, Jewish, Catholic, Syrian, all of them together. That first day, some 28,000 workers left the mills and headed for the streets. And they stayed on strike for weeks, all through January and into February. Today, as I said, few people remember what happened in Lawrence, but in those early months of 1912, what happened there captured the attention of the whole country. News of the strike made headlines in newspapers from coast to coast. Remember, especially for the kids here, there was no TV, no Snapchat, no Twitter. Newspapers were where you got your information. And as the strike continued, people who worked in mills and factories all over the United States started to reach into their own pockets to share what pennies they themselves had. They sent money for food to the workers and their families, who otherwise were starving. Soup kitchens were set up in each of the halls. The Lithuanians, of course, had their own hall, the Italians had theirs, and they fed them. By the end of February, though, things had continued to drag on so long that people in places like New York, Philadelphia, and Vermont volunteered to take in the children of the strikers. And so they sent trainloads from Lawrence, Massachusetts, first to New York City, then Barre, Vermont, to strangers. They sent their children to complete strangers who would take them in to see that they had good food to eat, warm clothes, some of them for the first time in their whole lives, and perhaps a chance to go to school while their parents continued to fight for a better life. One of the things that created the most sympathy for the strike, though, was an ill-advised attempt on the part of the authorities to stop that exodus of children from Lawrence, Kansas. They sent in the militia to stop mothers from putting their children on the trains. The next day's newspaper stories showed pictures of crying women being beaten and their children being ripped from them. This was a bad PR. Now, it's not my intention here to tell the story of union organizers and stubborn mill owners or violent clashes between workers and police and state militia in the streets. All of that is part of the story, and I could go on in great detail, but we have our little children with us today, and I don't want to make this too long for them. If you are interested in those details, I encourage you to go and find out the story. There are a couple of really good books that I can refer you to out there about the strike. What I want to focus on today is why this strike seemed so different, why it captured the hearts and minds of people all over the country in a way previous strikes hadn't seemed to do. Some of it was the sheer size of the strike, and some of it was the fact that people from so many different ethnic backgrounds came together in the same cause. Remember, this was something that was considered to be impossible. You were never going to get the Germans and the Italians to work together on the same cause. You were never going to get Jews and Catholics on the same side. But some of it, too, was because there were so many women and children involved. Newspapers all across the country regularly show pictures of row after row of those women and children marching, singing, and holding signs. And see, that was the thing. For all of the violent clashes that did occur, there was an awful lot of singing that went on with this strike. Song after song after song. And many people commented on the sheer joy on the faces of the strikers as they marched through the streets.
No! No!
Even in their signs, there was optimism. Many of those signs had the same phrase on them. They said,
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
They said, we want bread
I'm sorry, I
and
don't want
roses
to.
too.
I don't want
I know just how they feel. Because this strike had become about something more than just those 32 cents and the 3 loaves of bread that they could buy. Bread only feeds the body. The workers' fight wasn't just about the fight to have enough to simply stay alive. They wanted to have enough to truly live. Catherine Patterson, who some of you may know from the children's book, The Bridge to Terabithia, has written a novel for young people about the strike called Bread and Roses Too. And in it, one of the mothers who's on strike tries to explain to her young daughter, who's very full of fear about what she sees happening in the streets. She tries to explain to her daughter why she's willing to participate in the strike, to risk losing her job, and perhaps to be put in jail or even hurt or perhaps killed. And she tells her daughter, I think we want not just bread for our bellies. We want more than only bread. We want food for our hearts, our souls. We want, how to say it? We want, you know, Puccini music. We want for our beautiful children some beauty. We want roses. We can, I think, agree that enough food to eat, clean water to drink, a roof over our heads, and an education are basic human rights. But these things only fill our physical needs. They are the human rights of the body. We can survive if those needs are met, but we are not going to thrive with just those things. We, each of us, also need something more than just bread. We need roses too. We need to be able to play, to create, to dance, to sing. We need to experience beauty, to feel joy. These are the human rights of the soul, or the human rights of the spirit, if you prefer. Monica Cursa knows this, which is why she takes her boombox and her art supplies to migrants and the mill workers of Lawrence, Massachusetts, knew it too. In the words of Yara Zegler, bread sustains life, but beauty gives it meaning. So if you have 2 pennies in your pocket, buy 1 loaf of bread and 1 flower. This thought is not poetic. It is incendiary. It is not pretty. It is mad. We want flowers for the same reason we want art, music, poetry. Because we are human. Because we ran all the way down the route of utility maximization and quantifiable growth and found that some things just could not be quantified. It is because survival is not enough that we need flowers, beauty, happiness, love. Man's curse and his blessing is that he needs a reason to wake up in the morning. And just like those strikers in Lawrence, Massachusetts in 1912, we all need a reason to wake up in the morning. And these days, when you turn on the television and what you see is not happy, is not beautiful, we need those roses even more.